Welcome back to the channel, everyone. I know it's been a while since I published a video, but it has been well worth the wait because today's video is a special one. Today I'm joined by Dean Gooding, a seasoned prop master who has been working in the film industry for multiple decades. First, I just want to say welcome to the channel, Dean. I'm very excited to have you on here.
Thank you so much. When I saw your clip about the assassination of Jesse James, I thought you nailed it. So I was really pleased to hear from you.
Awesome. That makes me happy to hear that. So for those of you watching who don't know, can you tell us what a prop master does on a film set?
Well, anything an actor touches or handles in a scene, we're in charge of. So that could be weapons, food, eyeglasses you're wearing, wristwatches. If we're doing a restaurant scene, all the food, the dishware, the wait staff, anything that moves on a set that an actor or background performer handles, we're in charge of. So I like to say we put the action into the actor's hands.
Yeah. So what would you consider to be the coolest movie prop you've ever been in charge of?
I would say it's not a movie. It was a limited series for Netflix called A Series of Unfortunate Events, directed by Barry Sonnenfeld. And the key prop, which was the holy grail of that show, was a spyglass. It was one of the only props that carried on through the entire 3 seasons. And in the end, it had 82 moving parts. It was fully made out of brass, CNC with wood inlay. It was quite a device to build. We developed an alphabet code for it. So that was probably the coolest prop. But I do a lot of historical shows. So, for instance, on the assassination of Jesse James, Brad's revolvers that he used in the film were carefully researched down to the point that they actually had the serial numbers that were found on the revolvers with Jesse's body. So
wow.
That's how detailed we went.
Yeah, wow. Can you pinpoint a specific moment when you knew you wanted to be a filmmaker?
I don't know if there's a moment, but growing up, certainly I've always been attracted to entertainment and movies. They were a great escape from real life, as they are for everybody. And it wasn't until I was actually a radio major in college, and one of my secondary courses was film. And once I started working with some of my classmates on just little 5-minute films, we were still shooting 8 mil and 16 mil at the time, I realized then that I didn't want to be sitting behind a microphone in a booth somewhere. I wanted to be out on a set working. So it was probably my first year in college.
And how did you get your start in the film industry?
Again, those college students, I was working part-time, summer job, and they came in to the bar I was working and said, we need a set dresser tomorrow on a show that they were doing, a little Canadian TV series.
Yeah.
And so I went the very next day and started and never stopped. I went back to school, but I kept getting calls to work, so I didn't finish my college. I actually started working in the industry and never looked back.
What would you consider to be the first great memory in your filmmaking career? Would you have one?
I have many, but I think that I worked on a little-known film called Dead Bang that John Frankenheimer directed, and I was a fan of John Frankenheimer's films from the 60s, basically The Train and Black Sunday, which was a 1970s film. And he was an autocratic director, but I just remember going on that set, and he seemed larger than life to me. So that was the first one, and of course the second one was walking onto the set of Unforgiven and working with Clint Eastwood in that cast. I knew then that I hit the pinnacle, and I was still only in year 5 of my career at that point, but I knew that I'd hit the pinnacle very early.
Have you ever kept a prop and taken it home with you?
Rarely do I do that, but I do have a few pieces at home. I have Robert Duvall's spurs that I made him for open range and one of his holsters. So I've taken home a few iconic props, but most times that stuff is studio property, and they want to, nowadays more so than ever, there's such an aftermarket for movie props that everything goes back to the studio and will go into auction. But back in the late 80s and early 90s, it would just go to sale for the crew at 50% of the value. So I looked at a few things and set them aside, and with permission I bought them at the end of the film, and I kept them.
So you've worked for multiple different film studios in your career, from 20th Century Fox to Columbia Pictures to Warner Brothers. Which studio did you enjoy working for the most, or would you have a preference?
It's hard to pin it down. I think every show is its own entity. It's not really a studio thing as much as it is who is the director, who is the production designer, what is the script. So I had a real soft spot for Warner Brothers in the beginning because of Unforgiven, but all the way through the process, it just has changed so rapidly. I'm attracted to the filmmakers and the great producers that are still working. That's what drives me. I don't really look at whether it's TriStar's not, but Columbia and all those names that have all been merged into Disney or Amazon or whatever. But so I don't really have one. It's really about who's directing and
for sure. And it goes without saying that you've worked with some of the most talented actors in contemporary cinema, among those being Anthony Hopkins, Clint Eastwood, Morgan Freeman, Brad Pitt, Leonardo DiCaprio, and Henry Cavill. Do you have any memorable experiences with these actors that you could share?
Boy, they're all, first of all, everybody you mentioned there, the one thing I'll say about them all in general is that what you see portrayed in the media and the paparazzi chasing them around, when they come to the set, they're no different than I am or any crew member.
Right.
They want to do a really good job. They want a safe place to work, and they want to feel protected. Anthony Hopkins is a joy. I had the pleasure of working with him twice. On Legends of the Fall, I was an assistant prop master, and then again on The Edge. And Anthony was he is the nicest person. He's just down to earth, very genuine. And he would ask me my opinion on things. And the fan in me would go, you can do anything you want, you're Anthony Hopkins. But the professional in me would say, well, let's talk to the director and see what he thinks. So just all the way through, whether they're method actors or not, it all depends on what the scene is of the day as well and how we portray that. But no sort of memory jumps out at one thing. There's so many.
And what movie do you consider to be the standout masterpiece of all the films you've worked on?
Well, I have to tip my cap to The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford. Obviously not a huge blockbuster film by any stretch of the imagination. As a matter of fact, when it came out, it was somewhat misunderstood by the studio and just unceremoniously dumped into about 300 theaters, and they thought it would just go away. And, of course, now, since 2007, when it came out, it's become a cult type of film, and I've gotten more reaction to that film on my resume than anything I've done. I've had directors tell me it was the film that inspired them to go to film school. I've had cinematographers tell me it inspired them to be cinematographers. And so if you can leave that kind of legacy, even as a prop master, I feel like I'm part of the collective group of filmmakers. So if we can leave that kind of legacy for people behind to be inspired, I think that's the number one. I mean, obviously Unforgiven's right in there, but Jesse James for me personally was my crowning achievement.
As you know, there's an extended cut of The Assassination of Jesse James that has yet to be released. Is there any hope that we'll ever see this completed version of the film distributed in the future, perhaps released on a boutique Blu-ray label such as the Criterion Collection?
Boy, I feel like Criterion Collection is missing the boat on releasing that film personally, and I guess because I'm personally biased towards it. But if they understood the reaction that filmmakers have to that film, they might rethink that. I don't think we'll ever see the extended version. It was funny when I watched an interview where Roger Deakins was talking about what he saw the first cut. And so I opened my script again because I still have my original script. And that script has 266 scenes in it.
Wow.
And so I was going through and all the scenes that were cut. And I think that the pace of the film is the pace of the film. You have to know what you're getting yourself into.
Right.
It's an artistic Western. It's a journey. Scenes breathe. It's nature. It's the cinematography. So whether there was another 20 minutes in there or not, I don't think would have made any difference as far as what the studio perception would be. But to the audience, I think it would have fleshed out a couple of the stories a little bit more.
Yeah.
As to in some of the choices.
Yeah. And have you seen the... Go ahead.
Yeah, Jesse James' funeral. We shot Jesse James' funeral. We turned 6 city blocks in Winnipeg, Manitoba, into Kansas City, 1882.
Wow.
And the city were wonderful. We pulled all the parking meters out. They put down wooden boardwalks. My wife had put up something like 300 awnings on the windows. We had 300 background and corrector costume. We had a whole procession led by the Kansas City Police and the hearse, and there was an assassination attempt on T. James that they tackled the guy to the ground. That's one of the scenes that kind of stands out for me that didn't make it into the film.
Wow. And you have seen the extended cut of Jesse James then?
No, I'm no different than anybody else. I just know what we shot on the set.
Okay.
So, I was there when we filmed it, so that's my knowledge of it. But no, I haven't seen the extended cut. I think it only played really at Venice, and then it took 2 years for it to be released. So.
What can fans do of this film? Because I mean, I'm like so many others, as you mentioned, who have come to absolutely adore this film. I think it's one of the best films ever made. It's just masterful on so many levels. And what can fans like you and me, because obviously we both love the film, what can we do to perhaps get this extended cut in the future sometime?
Well, there was a fan of the film, I'm going to say 8 years ago, that had the Jesse James revival, and he was playing this film throughout North America, and I think Roger Deakins even attended, or Andrew Dominic even attended the screening. He was doing everything in his power to get Criterion and Warner Brothers to embrace the film and give it its due. And it kind of went away. Like, he was pretty active for about a year and a half, and I was getting notices of where these films were playing in art houses and whatnot. And it was really exciting to see that it was gaining that sort of love of what it is. And it kind of went away. So looking at it now, here we are 8 years later, I think it's just like anything. I think that I saw recently that Hollywood Reporter had mentioned it as one of the forgotten masterpieces, 20 forgotten masterpieces, or in the case of Jesse James,
yeah,
never really presented as such. It basically came out at the same time as No Country for Old Men and There Will Be Blood. I mean, 2007 in cinema was so groundbreaking and great films. And
yeah.
it just with little publicity, it still managed to get his Oscar nomination for cinematography and Casey Affleck's performance. And I mean, Roger Deakins is just, it's awe-inspiring to watch him work on a set.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And Andrew Dominic, who's the director of Jesse James, he's kind of a lesser-known director. What was his approach to the film on the set?
He's if you want to describe actors as method, like a Daniel Day-Lewis, Andrew is kind of a method director in my mind. I know I don't think anybody's ever said that before, but when you put the question to me, I'm thinking about what he was like. Everything had to be real. Everything had to have, like, I went through so much with him. One of the aspects of the film that's never in the film is that he wanted the characters. We were working with a wonderful producer named David Valdez, and it was my third picture with David. David also produced Unforgiven and Open Range.
Mm-hmm.
So with David, he always makes sure that you have rehearsals. Nowadays, production always feels rushed, and you can see it when you watch the movie. But on David's films, the cast are usually in town at least 2 weeks before we go to camera. Gives time for, you can rehearse some pivotal scenes. And one of the things that Andrew did was he wanted to have table reads in the morning and rehearse certain scenes with all the cast, all the James gang. So basically, he came to me and said, listen, I want them to read a period-correct newspaper from that era, and it has to be real.
Wow.
So my assistant and I, this is there's a lot, it's 2005, so computers existed, but we actually get on the phone to the Kansas, like the newspapers are from Kansas and St. Louis and Baltimore, New York, sort of all the different stories of the Jesse James robberies and whatnot. So we went through all the state archives on the phone and got the paper sent to us on microfiche. And they transferred the microfiche to DVD or CD-ROM or whatever that technology was of the day. And we went to a graphics company in Calgary, Alberta, and we had to clean up some of the text and fill in some of the dropouts. And then we found a newspaper company in Leduc, Alberta, northern Alberta. It was the only place left that printed on broadsheet paper because all newspapers have gotten smaller, but our papers had to be larger. There were like 20 papers printed for Jesse James, and they're all period correct. The only thing we did to change a paper was when, on the assassination day, when Brad Pitt puts the newspapers down on the settee, Casey Affleck sees the arrest and confession of Dick Little. That is the only thing that we put into a national newspaper. But all the newspapers in the movie were real. So anyway, every day we would give them a new newspaper, and they would read articles out loud to each other to understand what was going on in Missouri at the time, or in New York, or in Baltimore, so they would understand the world they were entering. And that's what we did for that film.
You've also worked with some other phenomenal directors, among them being visionary Christopher Nolan and comic book auteur Zack Snyder. What was your experience like making movies alongside these two?
Well, Chris Nolan, to start with, I was prop guy number 5. I was working on a TV show in Vancouver, and we shut down for 3 weeks, and I got a call from, ironically, the production manager I did Jesse James with, and said, "Can you come and help us with the snow unit?" And I said, "Sure." So I came to work on that unit for 9 days. And the property master was a gentleman named Scott McGinnis and an assistant named Eric Garibay. Excellent prop masters and assistants, just really great people. And so to work on a Nolan set was a set of high pace, high energy, but total professionalism. Like, he knew what he wanted. We shot fast. There were no long takes and lingering over things. It was very rapid fire filmmaking. It was a real joy. Zack Snyder, again, I stepped in and helped a prop master named Jimmy Chow, who had done Watchmen with Zack, and so I went in to help him on Sucker Punch, put the World War I sequence together in that movie, because I had done World War I 3 times prior to that. Mm-hmm. And then on Superman, the Superman film, I stepped in, and props is very exciting. You get to work with weapons and everything. My job on Superman, because I could only be there for a month because I had another show to go do, was to do all the license plates for the movie. Oh. So I had to research all the historical license plates, order them in, get them made, and create a binder for the set crews so they knew if they were in Kansas City and whatever year it was, that they had the correct decals and all of that. So as much as props can be very exciting, here I am handing Brad Pitt his revolver on Jesse James, or I'm standing with Clint Eastwood on that set. Sometimes you're sitting in an office figuring out license plates like you're working for the Department of Motor Vehicles for a month. So Zack is a joy. Zack is a collaborator. He's probably one of the nicest people I've seen around that environment. Just a real collaborator.
So now we know that the license plates are your mark on Man of Steel.
Absolutely. You see a license plate, that was me.
Awesome. Now, I have to ask you about this because there's a pretty significant overlap between the subjects. You worked with Alec Baldwin on the 1997 film The Edge. As most watching already know, Alec Baldwin was involved in a freak shooting accident about 2 years ago on the set of the movie Rust, where the cinematographer was subsequently killed as a result of the prop master either being unqualified or absent-minded. If you were to have worked on Rust, what would be the correct procedure a prop master would go through to prevent an accident like this from occurring?
Well, first of all, there's no live ammo allowed on the set. That's number one. There's no live ammo that, even in the States, in the movie bulletin number 1 regarding firearms, no live ammo. That's number one. So no live ammo would have come through any door. You can tell whether something's live or not, as opposed to a dummy bullet. I won't get into all the boring stuff because your audience will roll their eyes. But suffice to say, I use a 5-step process as a property master, and I have armored as well. On open range, we did our own armoring for that big climactic shootout at the end. And basically, when I open the vault to bring a firearm to set, I check the firearm to make sure that it's completely safe and empty. If I have to put in dummy bullets, and a dummy bullet for your audience it looks like a real bullet. In the case of the revolvers, it would have no primer because you don't need to see a loading sequence, but It has a marble in it. So I would shake that marble and make sure the marble's in there. I'd load it into the revolver. Whatever I need, let's say six. I click it off 6 times in my truck, 7 times actually, just go through the cycle full. Then I go to set. I go up to the first assistant director. I bring them over. I show them. First of all, I show them that all the dummy bullets in the revolver have no primers or struck primers, and then I click it off for that AD 7 times. They know it's safe. Then I show the camera crew. Again, do the same process. Show them it's safe. Then when the actor arrives on set, and anybody who has to be in the proximity cast-wise of this firearm, I go through it again. So in reality, I click that firearm off at least 20 times to 25 times before I ever put it into an actor's hands. Mm-hmm. Because you can't check a firearm enough to know that it's safe. In the case of Rust, all they had to do was follow one of those steps. Only one before it got put into Alex's hand. And it was a complete failure across the board. When they hire these people, you have to have experienced people in those roles. And the fact of that film is it goes back to hiring procedures and looking at resumes and understanding what the nature of the job is. And clearly they, from the top on down, they just completely dropped the ball, and then the tragedy resulted from it.
Yeah, all right. Well, changing subjects a little bit here. We hear a lot about the death of cinema these days and the declining state of cinema. What are your thoughts on the current state of modern cinema?
I'm saddened by a lot of it, I have to confess. I think that now that we live in this instant access world and digital cameras and iPhones that can shoot movies, I always appreciate when Marty Scorsese and some of the legendary directors are still out there. And I think Chris Nolan and Denis Villeneuve are still aspiring that direction. And I think as long as studios are patient, allow those filmmakers to make their movies. But the graceful, paced-out film, unless it's an indie, is not being made at the studio level. Even Jesse James was an indie film. Even though Warner Brothers backed it, it didn't have a large budget, and it was pretty much ignored even while we were filming it. So we just kind of did our own thing.
Yeah.
And so the state of cinema is that when you get with a really great director that has a vision, it's a joy for us in the crafts, because we know that they're not just answering to some studio executive who thinks that a ledger line on a spreadsheet makes them creative in the creative arena. And many times I'll challenge a young studio executive who's challenging me by saying, how many years have you done my job? And they usually stare at me and I go, that's right. That's why you hired me. Be creative. So yeah, the state of cinema, boy, when a great film comes out, you really embrace it. My wife's a voting member of the Academy because she was nominated for Unforgiven. Mm-hmm. So every year we have the Academy channel. And it's always a joy to find that small film that maybe didn't get any publicity or real push, and you sit there and go, wow, this is what filmmaking is. But you also know the pain that person went through to get that film made.
Oh yeah, it's a passion project.
And which means there's no money. I'm on one of those right now. I can't say what it is, but the director is a joy. He's a visionary. He shot some really nice visionary films that didn't have a lot of money, and we're trying to do that again with this one. And we all love the script so much that we're fighting tooth and nail to try and maintain the integrity of what we're going to put on the screen, because I think we have an opportunity to make a really great film.
Is there a release date that we would be able to know about for when we can go and watch your new movie?
I think that they're hoping to be at Cannes next year. That's all I'll say.
Okay.
At this point in time.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing what that is. And while we were coordinating this interview, you mentioned in some messages that you were in the process of writing a book with your wife, Janice, about both of your careers. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I have one book out already to begin with. It's called They Don't Pay Me to Say No, My Life in Film and Television Props. It's been out for a year with little publicity, but I keep getting messages every day from filmmakers around the world that find the book and love the book. So once I put that book out, I discovered that I had a love for writing. So I started to write a second book about my wife, Janice. I'm actually ghostwriting it for her because she's retired now, and she had a 40-year career in set decoration where she was a woman in a man's world in a lot of cases. As one of the only department heads on a film. For instance, she was the first woman set decorator that Clint Eastwood's company ever hired in the history of El Paso. And she's also the only Canadian woman to ever been nominated for a set decoration Oscar in history, on top of being the first. So I thought we would tell her story to inspire young women filmmakers. So that's what we're working on right now. And I actually have a third book that I'm starting to plot out about the Westerns that I've done. Because the first book that I wrote, They Don't Pay Me to Say No, chronicles my 36 years from that film school guy who stumbled onto a set and 36 years later is still there. And I talk about little stories all the way through. And it's a positive book. I don't delve in the negative. I talk about the joy and the wonder of being there.
Yeah.
And I still have the joy and wonder all those years later.
Fantastic. Well, Dean, I just wanted to say thank you again for taking the time to do this interview. I know not everyone in the film industry would be willing to take time out of their busy week to do a video for YouTube. So again, it's been a pleasure talking with you, and I'm sure everyone watching right now would agree. And there you have it, folks. Dean Goodine, seasoned prop master and active in the film industry for over 3 decades. Keep an eye out for Dean's book releasing in the future. If you enjoyed this video and want more content like this, please consider liking and subscribing. It would be highly appreciated. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.